So this video is going to be a little bit different from what I normally do. It's going to be a guide on how to pretty much play around anything the game has to offer. So pretty much all of the different monster types like smashers, flingers, lobbers, nurses, spolders, how to counter certain unique terrain, so like mountains basically, and how to also counter modifiers of any kind, because some modifiers do of course cause problems for different builds, like if you're building defensively by building all of your scraps at your objective, like certain modifiers are going to be easier or harder with that sort of playstyle, so I will be going over that as well, and also playstyles too. But just as a quick little side note, I will be referring to crowd control, because I will be saying crowd control a lot to CC, because I don't want to say crowd control 20 million times this video. But with that being said, let's hop straight into the video. So let's start with block-offs, barricades, or sandwiches, however which one you call them. If you want to be able to trap efficiently and cheaply, you need to be able to place block-offs. That pyramid that I placed right there, pretend it's going to be the objective, and the enemy spawns are going to be all the way over here, with the metal pyramids. So an easy way to block off all of these enemies is to pretty much just use some walls, some ramps, and just find that key sort of choke point where most, if not all, of the enemies are going to be in. So you can all force them to be in one space, so you don't really need as many traps to actually kill all of the enemies. So something like that, because all of the enemies spawn on top of that mountain, is going to be the most optimal choke point to be able to trap out all of those enemies. But let's say maybe the enemies don't spawn in a simple spot like that, where it's just all flat ground. What if they just spawn out of this little hole right here? What sort of barricade strategy would you do? Well, it's actually pretty simple. If all of the spawns are, as an example, right here, let's build some barricades real quick. So basically enough, it's actually a pretty easy spot on how you can barricade, because all of the enemies are effectively going to be coming down this ramp right here, which means that's going to be where our choke point is. So effectively, no matter which side of that cliff they go down, rather that be the ramp or the other ramp on the other side, we can basically put the entrance to a scrap tunnel right here, basically playing around all of that bad terrain, whatever, you know, and just do whatever we sort of want. So I'm just going to make a quick little just random tunnel, and with a few extra barricades, that's pretty much about it. We're able to play around the spawn fairly easily, even though the terrain isn't really the best. But there's also a few other techniques that you can use too. You don't just have to use just walls and ramps. You can just get creative by using certain other things besides, of course, walls, ramps, pyramids here and there. Here's another technique when it comes to building barricades, and this one's honestly pretty fun one, I would say, because you use edited floors with low walls. This one's pretty fun because it's just really simple. You can see what's going on the other side of the barricades, and also it plays around terrain like that. You can see that the barricade is right beside this wall right here. So when an enemy drops down here, they always have to go through 2 layers of buildings, so that edited floor and that wall. Because if I were to do a ramp instead, it's only a 1 layer, which means enemies would most likely just break that and just ignore all of your scraps. You do not want that if you're building barricades beside some sort of elevated terrain like that. So make sure you always use edited floors instead of walls in that sort of scenario. Like, you could just do edited walls, like, just like fences like that. It doesn't really matter. From what I know, that I don't think health points affect structures. It's just a tier, but I'll get into that shortly. So what makes these sort of barricades good is that you could just shoot over them. Like, you could use drones, Teddy, any sort of rifle, and you could shoot over them. So if there's like flingers and lobbers camping, you could just shoot them over the barricades. But of course, the downside with this setup is that basic ranged enemies like pitchers, gunslingers, and blasters will also be able to shoot over the barricades to hit you as well. So it's a little bit situational, you don't need them, but it's a fun little barricade technique that you could use. Especially if you are running, or you know someone that's running Teddy, you could just sort of like throw these down and you get really good value from their ability. But let's say maybe your objective is a lot closer than where it is currently. Maybe we're distracted on a race. That's where the objective is. Because sometimes in certain spots that actually can't happen where the objective is in a, you know, like a spot that you remember, but it's just sort of off. Like, it's just a lot closer or in a different spot for no reason at all. Sometimes that does happen from time to time. So if we're building somewhere like right here, it could be good to possibly build your regular barricades, but also a fun and easy technique that's actually very good for both frostnite, hordes if you're able to afford it, as well as endurance mainly, is that you can just upgrade your building mats. I know health points don't really matter from what I'm aware when it comes to how barricades fundamentally work, but higher tier buildings in general will repel more enemies than if they weren't upgraded. So if that was like tier 1 wood, stone, metal, you would need more wares if you want to prevent enemies from going through all of your barricades and ignoring your traps. So something like this with wood can be more efficient than using something like tier 2 metal, I do believe. Another easy and cheap barricade technique that you could do is, let's say you might not have as much building materials, and you have lots of crafting materials. Oh, that's fine, because if you do a simple trick by just putting a support trap on your barricades, so that support trap could be like pretty much like wall launchers, wall lights, freeze, or floor launchers. Even broadsides work, because you need your strap to be able to stagger and knock back enemies. So putting a wall launcher like that on your barricades is really good. And the reason why is when enemies don't knock back or a staggered effect, it resets their AI, which means that they will be more likely to just run into your trap tunnel after they get staggered or launched. And this is of course a really good technique for endurance, of course, because, well, they don't attack your barricades, which is of course great. But yeah, it also just means that you can make really small barricades really easily. And this is really good technique too for defensive builds as well, because what makes defensive builds really good is that they're just really cheap and fast to make. So being able to just drop some launches down without really having to care about your barricades is really good in my opinion. But with that being said, let's get into how crowd control works, because crowd control is very, very important with how this game works. Crowd control, like I said, is extremely important. You cannot make a build with straps without crowd control. Like even damaged builds, you cannot make a build without crowd control. Like a lot of the times I'll see people spam like ceiling fields, darts, like even retractables for some reason. Like I absolutely F-tier trap, honestly. Like I would see people just spam straps like that, and I would just watch them fail, because the problem that they have is that they don't have a way to support those traps by stalling enemies, pushing them back, freezing them, stun, slow them down, you know, they don't have any way to stop enemies from basically just going past their straps when they're on cooldown, and that's mainly why crowd control is just so important, is because of how long the cooldown is for a lot of straps. So with that being said, I might as well show you a few CC combos that you can use to just support your straps, because why not? So if you're building defensively like this, so building all of your straps at your objective, just chill and put a wall launcher there. Also, this is like a quick little tip for people that like using both 4 and wall launcher. Make sure they have different reload times. This is one of the most rookie mistakes that I see people make in public games, or when they just make random videos in general. They'll just have like basically their 4 and wall launcher, or their sound wall light freeze, just have double reload. But the problem with that is that all of those straps have the same reload, except for the 2 launcher straps. They have like a reload of 4.3 with 2 reload perks fully maxed out, and then the other support straps have around 6.5. So a lot of the time it's actually better to have a copy of like freeze or wall lights that don't have their reload perks maxed out, because not only is that of course cheaper when it comes to perk up, which is nice, but it just means that you can combo that strap with a lot of other straps a lot easier. And it just means that you have a better combo when it comes to CC, because having good CC means you get less weeks. If you get less weeks, you're more likely to obviously not lose. So make sure when you're using 4 and wall launchers, they don't have the same perks. Like make one, of course, have 1 reload, or 2 reloads that aren't upgraded, or maybe no reloads at all, depending on how many of them you're using. And yeah, but other than that, this is a really good CC combo. Like, really reliable, I guess. For a defensive build, you can use like straps like freeze, wall lights. I mean, you could replace those wall lights with freeze that actually I think are maybe better for defensive builds, but I don't really think it matters so much. But yeah, having like alternative freeze, especially wall lights alternating is kind of stupid sometimes. And the nice thing with wall lights is you could just have a wall dart just shoot through the window of it. You could also have a ceiling field to sap through the window too, as long as the husks are close enough to the window. But yeah, also another good strategy is to just have like alternating sound walls and wall lights. That's a really good strategy in general, because you're able to support your sound walls. And for a CC combo like this, it's a really good combo, because that just means that if you put all of those straps on windows, you just have so much space for all of your damage tools. And if you have something like that with a wall launcher, you could just basically recycle enemies over and over again, and with the sound walls they won't be able to, of course, damage anything whatsoever, so that's a really good combo. Now let's talk about a aggressive playstyle, so strap tunnels, basically. So I'll get more into playstyles in a bit, but there are some really good CC combos that you can, of course, just use when it comes to playing aggressively with strap tunnels. There are some good combos, like if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that like I religiously main sometimes like 4 launchers and tires, because that's a really good combo. But you can also just use like alternating freeze and lights, as you saw me do earlier. You can put like some really well placed wall launchers too if you're making a strap tunnel like this that has lots of edges. Or maybe get more creative with just some 4 launchers and added, wall into like a sort of fence-like thing, and just chuck enemies over it and just recycle them over and over again. That's also a really good way to just CC enemies and just stall them. And then add like a bit of support with like a wall light, or maybe a tire strap here and there. And of course 1 force spike, can't really forget 1 force spike. A lot of people don't actually know, surprisingly, how 1 force spike works, but I'll mention that in a second. So with tire straps, and the same goes for freeze 4s and 4 launchers, those are directional straps, which means the placement of the strap matters. So as you can see with the tank here, it's facing towards like the wall, which means enemies will get staggered towards that wall and actually will be more likely to weak past my defenses, which is not what you want. And you can see with the 4 launcher, with the feet of the husks on the picture, if they're facing a certain direction, they will stagger in that direction. That's of course important because huskies that land from being launched by a 4 launcher will just roll in the opposite direction. And that's a really good technique because you could just send huskies straight up into the air and literally just have them get perma-stalled by it for like a ridiculously cheap trap. It's really broken, honestly. So gonna just put some wall weights here because, you know, CC. And let's talk about 1-4 spikes because I kind of ignored those. So 1-4 spikes are interesting because they apply a 50% snare that goes over 6 seconds. And basically, because it takes around 1.5 seconds for a basic husk to cross a tile, and the 50% means that they actually take 3 seconds when affected by it, it means that you have the enemies that are hit by the 1-4 spikes, they're snared for 2 tiles, so they're snared for like 2 of these freeze traps, which is really, really good if you're making super cheap builds, because it just means that you're just able to debuff literally everything, like nurses, basic husks of any kind, huskies of any kind, mist monsters, including smashers of any kind will take this is one of the trap tunnel. Honestly, it's kind of a staple in my opinion for really cheap builds, so definitely really use that trap. And also, the level doesn't matter with the trap too. Like, you could just main a tier 1 1-4 spike in, it would just be completely fine. So let's talk about playstyles now. You could play defensively by building all of your traps at the objective, and building aggressively by building all of your traps in a trap tunnel. So there's of course pros and cons for both sort of playstyles. The pros for building defensively is, like I said earlier, it's very quick, it is cheap, it also plays around Death Bomb as well, it counters most terrain elements, so like mountains basically, because normally most objective spots have flat ground. And it's also just really easy to just set up like super cheap barricades too. And there's also a lot of like really easy strategies that you could just do with, of course, making your traps at your objective, of course. So as you can see, I'm just kind of like setting up like a simple defensive build, you know, put some wall launchers to defend my my block offs, of course, because like I mentioned at the start, these traps will reset the AI of all of those enemies, which means they're more likely to go into my traps. And there I just put a 4 launcher just to show off some variety, because I do kind of main wall launchers for that occasionally. Do some sound walls, which are pretty simple. They're alright as a CC trap. And then do some other traps. Kind of like the beginning, like if I want to use like freeze or Rule 4, because it's like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Like I already got lots of CC anyways. Because it's really easy to just, you know, not use that many CC traps when it comes to a defensive build and just get away with it because, you know, why not? Epic misplacement right there. And yeah, just like that, it's pretty much built. Now there are some cons, of course, when it comes to building defensively. Like, you cannot build defensively unless you have a constructor. You need a constructor. Defensive builds also tend to struggle against a lot of modifiers that amplify the amount of damage certain enemies do. So nature enemies will do double damage against metal, which means being handicapped to stone is really bad because of smashers. Frenzy also multiplies both the speed and the damage of pretty much every enemy. And wall weakening basically debuffs any structure in the game to take double damage. So when you're having a smasher just charge through your traps, and yeah, it's just able to do like double the damage. Yeah, that's not really good because that means that you could potentially get weaks. And the problem with, of course, defensive builds is it's very easy to weak if you do lose a wall. So let me go over the pros and cons for building an aggressive build. So building an aggressive build is kind of the opposite of building defensively. It's of course weak against death bombs, which is kind of whatever, but it's very easy to use and to main when it comes to playing around nature, frenzy, and wall awakening. You also don't need a constructor too when it comes to playing it aggressively. You can just chill and just play whoever you want, just as long as you don't have too many weaks. But it is a lot harder to CC enemies. You do need really good CC tactics or big shrap tunnels if you don't want to get weaks consistently. And yeah, that's kind of about it, honestly. Like, there's not really much to say with aggressive build other than it's like, if you don't mind spending more materials, it's sort of easier. But it does also mean that you do have to try and play around the unique terrain that each spot gets. It can be a bit of a problem here and there. But you might be wondering, after I say it's worse to build a aggressive build because of death bombs, but it's worse to build a defensive build because of frenzy, wall awakening nature. So you might be wondering, okay, that's good at all, but what if I play mission with frenzy, death bomb, that's nature, and that's wall awakening? What is the best strategy to do there? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You just build aggressively. There's more modifiers that are bad when it comes to playing defensively than there is aggressively, and there's actually not really any modifiers besides death bombs that punish you for building aggressively. So as long as you build all of your traps out in the front, max them out, and make sure it's a stall build, you shouldn't really have any problems with that modifier combo. And that's also, I do believe, the hardest modifier combo in the game too, so yeah, that's pretty much how you counter it. Not really too hard. Okay, so let's talk about countering unique enemy types in this game. There's lots of enemies to, you know, worry about in Save the World. So I'm just going to go over pretty much some simple strategies on just how to counter them in general. With spolders are a very interesting enemy because you kind of assume that you need sound walls even when building defensively, but you actually don't. Because spolders normally are very close to objective with a defensive build. It's actually better to just spam anti-air, or just drop at least a handful of them. And then that plays really well into counter bombs too. So normally when you build defensively, you don't actually need sound walls specifically to counter spolders. Like maybe one or two here and there, but unless you're specifically meaning like defenders and that sort of strategy, where you're, you know, playing like a really active ward out, you don't really need sound walls when it comes to building defensively. But when it comes to building aggressively, you definitely do need sound walls. So when you use sound walls in a aggressive build, I'll just build a trap tunnel, I guess, real quick, just to like funnel them into a straight line, just to give, you know, a good example. The trap tunnels are very easy and simple to make. So the best way to, of course, counter spolders is just support your sound walls. Just have like an alternative base shot. I mentioned this earlier with crowd control. But yeah, having a, you know, freeze trap or wall light, you know, something like that, alternate with your sound walls is an extremely easy and good way to pretty much de-arm all of those spolders. So you don't have any explosions going on in your trap tunnel. And from there, you could of course just use whatever damage or stall traps you're using depending on playstyle. Or you can even just add more sound walls, like having 2 sound walls just alternate, you know, also just works too. You know, you don't have to be limited to just using sound walls with freeze or sound walls with wall lights. You know, you could just kind of do whatever you want. Alright, so let's talk about nurses, because nurses are a very interesting enemy when it comes to trapping, because you sort of kind of need something like wall darts, retractables, or broadside. You can't make a damage strategy that plays around nurses without any one of those free traps. It is what it is, kind of annoying, but whatever. But yeah, that's pretty much how you counter nurses. It's not really that interesting. Like double crit damage broad is good, retractables is retractable, so it's kind of whatever. But wall darts are probably one of the best. It's debatable if dome shooters honestly or not, and also because of the projectile count that darts have. Because wall darts shoot 6 projectiles, at most it can only hit 6 unique enemies, but that's not a downside. It can also hit the same enemy multiple times, which means if a nurse is standing specifically like in the middle of a wall dart, it can take like pretty much multiple damage. And of course, when it comes to broadside, just make sure there's a wall in front of it, of course, because you want it to be able to do as much damage as possible, of course, against those nurses. So let's get into elementals. Oh, my bad. Not elementals, lobbers and flingers. So with lobbers, you of course want to have some anti-airs. I think like around normally 2 per corner of your objective should be perfect for building defensively against spolders. Because you of course want to be able to, you know, play around lobbers too, you know. And you could also just up defenders too. Defenders are a really ridiculously easy counter for flingers. Like, I normally main bundle bust because I suck, but you can also just use other weapons too. Like, you could use weapons like the shooting star or the thunderbolt. Those are great support weapons. You can also use other weapons like the bald eagle. The double boiler is a really good one too. You can also use the Shack's Revenge too. Obliterator and third rail are fine, but they're not really good for defensive builds because there's no targeting priority. Same with Compression Buster. Like, it's good for support, but bows aren't really good at all with defenders, so I wouldn't really suggest using it in general. But other than that, that's pretty much how you counter flingers and lobbers. And yeah, you could just show honestly with just defenders. I've played lots of games without constructor, and defenders kind of carry. You can also make a lobber screen too. Just as long as lobbers don't have a line of sight of your roof or objective, they won't throw, especially flingers. And this is of course a really good strategy to do for both Hordes and frostnite, because it just means that you can funnel all of those enemies to a specific spot. So like right here, there's no lobber screen, so now I know that either I could place a trap here, so I know lobbers will always head here, because sometimes like they'll attack the lobber screen, and it's not really that good sometimes in some spots, but in other times it works really well. But yeah, that's basically pretty much how you completely counter lobbers, flingers, just floating. Alright there. But yeah, let's get into elementals. So elementals are interesting because they're kind of weird. So certain traps will be more effective against them. So like, a trap like row 4 is always better than retractables, no matter what, in fire and nature zones, because of how elemental damage fundamentally works. Also, the stats for this trap wise, it's actually around 120k, because it just counts the base damage, not the affliction, too. So, there's that. So yeah, having a trap that hits 120,000 damage, compared to a trap that hits, you know, like around technically 34k, because physical damage is reduced by 50% against all elemental enemies, and because most enemies are replaced with elementals in both 4 players and 160s in general, it's actually more better to use something like row 4. No matter what, even if it's just for the base attack, it's still more damage by a little bit. And the same goes for broadside. Broadside ricochets a total of 7 times in a 1x1 area, which again, the game doesn't tell you that for some reason. But because of that, it means that broadside's overall damage, I do believe might be around probably 30k. I'm gonna craft a dynamo just real quick, just to showcase the damage. Oh, it's 20,000. Okay. So if it ricochets 7 times, just multiply, you know, that by 7. So that's 140,000 damage. But because it's physical damage, it gets reduced by 50%, which means that's actually around 7,000 damage. But our wall dynamos, they hit more damage. I do believe it's somewhere around 11% more damage that they do hit. Yep, around 78,000. And because nature against water is always 100% damage, it's always better to use a wall dynamo instead of a broadside in water zones. Now, mind you, like I mentioned earlier, it's actually, you kind of need physical damage in traps because of nurses. So it's kind of really debatable if you want to replace all of your broadsides with dynamos. But doing a combo like this, like a retractable dynamo or a grill broadside, for of course the respective zones, is a really good strategy. Very, very simple. And yeah, that's kind of about it. Throw in some CC, like a tire strap, wall light, and you're pretty much fine. That's all you really need. Okay, so let's move on to smashers, the big boys, the guys that somehow seem to cause the most amount of problems. And I'll be honest with you, there's not really a good way to trap them out. They have way too much health for a majority of 4 players, so you can't really trap them out. But that also doesn't mean I can't necessarily just CC traps that are good against them specifically, and certain damage traps that are good against them specifically. So basically, you could use traps like I mentioned, like 1-4 spikes. I didn't mention sound walls or tar, of course, but yes, you can use tar and wall lights to, of course, stall smashers, and they should be guaranteed for them being low power level too. And for damage dealers, definitely use wall darts. Like I mentioned before, wall darts can hit the same enemy multiple times, so if a smasher is standing right in the middle of the trap, it could just casually do like times 4 or 5 damage, just because why not? Definitely use wall darts because, yeah, darts are great. But you can also use a candidate like this, where you have like a tar and a wall light, or if you're feeling really toxic, double wall light alternating. And that's a really good way to CC the absolute shit out of smashers, because they just basically can't really progress or charge if they're getting stunned over and over again, which is really, really good. And if you decide to put like multiple carpets like that, yeah, you're just gonna be able to stall them for a really long time. Buys a lot of different weapons and loadouts in general, lots of time to kill them. But yeah, there's not really that good of a strategy when it comes to countering smashers. You just sort of have to CC them and deal with them manually. There's not really a good counter. Just also, if you don't want to deal with smashers, just build aggressively by doing trap tunnels. I forgot to mention that, but yeah, if you want to be able to play around smashers really easily, just try to build aggressively. But other than that, that is pretty much the video done. I actually do kind of like this format of videos, so maybe if you guys like it, maybe tell me in the comments. And make sure to like and subscribe, because I am a small YouTuber after all. It would help out a lot if you could. So, yeah,